Welcome to Climate Changemakers, a podcast discussing climate, politics, and the fight for a sustainable future. I am a presenter, Trishita Bose. Lending their expert opinion to the phenomenon of climate change are Professor Guy Garrett, Professor of Environmental and Rural Studies from the University of Newcastle, and Professor Orly Charles, Senior Lecturer of Social and Policy Sciences from the University of Bath. This podcast features climate action groups Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil, along with Doctors for Extinction Rebellion. Speaking on behalf of these groups are Claire Farrell, co-founder of Extinction Rebellion, Lawrence Leather, spokesperson and social media manager for Just Stop Oil, and Dr. Chris Newman, co-founder of Doctors for Extinction Rebellion. Climate change is the most definitive crisis of our time, and it is a crisis on the hands of the world because no country, community, or corner is immune from the threat. Rising temperatures are fueling environmental degradation, natural disasters, weather extremes, food and water insecurity, economic disruption, and much more. The glaciers are melting, sea levels are rising, coral reefs are dying, and forests are burning, all at a much faster rate than previously predicted. And as much as climate change deniers would want us to believe otherwise, climate change is real, imminent, and by every evidence ominous. Professor Guy Garrett speaks about the dire reality of climate change.
There's a large weight of scientific information that supports, what were just earlier theories about climate change. And I guess we all have our own sort of anecdotal evidence, more frequent extreme weather events that just sort of provides a little bit of support for the scientific data. So, I guess people are seeing things with their own eyes that backs up all that science.
One of the leading causes of climate change today is the burning of fossil fuels, which alters the Earth's ecosystems. Professor Garrett explains the problem with fossil fuels and how the world has come to be so reliant on their use.
It's how we've used fossil fuels past 120 years or so, burning them fairly indiscriminately to fuel cars, provide electricity. It's done a lot to fuel economic growth. At the same time, we've had this very substantial increase in greenhouse gas production, which is sort of one of the leading causes of climate change. So we've had benefits from burning fossil fuels. Now we're paying the price.
The urgency of moving away from fossil fuels, securing energy supplies and cutting carbon emissions has never been clearer. But the governments of the world are well behind on the curve on climate action. And to bring the focus to the UK, the current cost of living crisis is directly linked to the climate crisis. Professor Orly Charles explains how the UK could have been leading the charge, but instead is falling behind.
It's much easier in a sense to talk about low carbon and net zero carbon when we look at new infrastructure, new buildings. But when you look at retrofitting our existing building, that's where the core of the problem is, and that cannot be done without heavy investment from the government and other bodies. I'm thinking about the UK Infrastructure Bank. In terms of governmental implementation, certainly UK government is far behind what it's supposed to do in terms of investment. What we see new is what is called, coming out of the COP meetings, is what is called national determined contribution. It is each government, each nation across the world is committed to lower their carbon emission according to their own capacity, and certainly the UK has the means to be a global leader in that, but it's not happening at the moment.
This June, a new progress report released by the Independent Climate Change Committee, CCC, has found major failures in delivery programs towards the achievement of UK's climate goals. In July, the British High Court ruled that the government's net zero strategy breaches the Climate Change Act. This was in response to a suit filed by Client Earth against the UK government over its net zero strategy. This ruling also states that Greg Hands, the Minister for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, who was responsible for signing off the net zero strategy, didn't have the legally required information on how carbon budgets would be met. He nevertheless approved the strategy. In the light of this ruling, the UK government has once again committed to net zero. But who's leading the charge? Worryingly, Britain is now without a Prime Minister, and those next in line have nothing to offer on climate in the leadership debates so far. Claire says it's hardly surprising.
The Tory party itself, they are not the people who are going to advocate for dismantling the fossil fuel industry, decarbonising the economy, and playing our part on leading the international community in some way on rapid decarbonisation, which is obviously what needs to happen. And so I'm not at all surprised that a Tory party leadership campaign campaign doesn't see climate as a high priority. The membership and the donor membership of the Tory party are obviously not the people who want to advocate for powerful action.
The infinite cost of climate change is reaching irreversible highs, and the government is evidently failing to rise to the occasion. In the light of this, climate action groups like Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil and a whole brigade of young climate activists associated with these organizations are calling for bold collective action. So who are these groups and what are they doing exactly? Well, Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil are both organizations that use non-violent civil disobedience campaigns to fight against the climate crisis and for social justice. Both these groups are explicitly focused on young people taking action. Just Stop Oil has a more straightforward goal: to stop the government from approving new fossil fuel licenses and consents in the UK. They argue that the UK has 8 years of fossil fuel production left in which to rapidly transition to a zero carbon economy. Extinction Rebellion, on the other hand, is a more international movement fighting to create a world that is fit for the future generations. Extinction Rebellion has a bit of a complex background. Claire explains how it came to be united around the climate change concern.
Extinction Rebellion really sort of formed out of a network of activists called Rising Up, set up between a group of people, including one of the founders who's quite well known, called Gail Bradbrook. And she was trying to work on ideas for civil disobedience for quite a long time, about how to sort of use that methodology and popularise it. So there were lots of people in a kind of decentralised but connected network that were using different tactics and different campaign methods to do small campaigns. They decided collectively to sort of unite around a common issue, because the power of lots of small campaigns versus the idea of coming together around an issue like climate, which is going to affect all of kind of social justice and environmental justice, seem to make sense given the context.
The keywords to the campaigns carried out by both Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion are non-violent and civil disobedience. How effective are these tactics to drive policy change at the government level, or are these groups playing on a different agenda? Lawrence Leather explains Just Stop Oil's rationale.
In a broader sense, our aim is shifting the Overton window, so shifting what is considered normal in our society, and I think we're succeeding in that. In the same way that Extinction Rebellion in 2019, they succeeded in climate change becoming quite a normal subject for people to speak about, and it was suddenly front and centre in the mainstream media. That is the same as Just Stop Oil's aim, to shift the oil becomes viewed more toxically generally in society and get it spoken about more, the situation we really are in with the climate emergency. So yeah, I think although it's over quite a long period of time that we start to see actual policy change in relation to oil and gas licenses, we don't expect policy change to be immediate. We expect social change to come first and then policy change to come after that. So I have faith that our actions and our tactics will create that change, even if immediately we're not seeing it in front of our eyes.
Their agenda is similar to Extinction Rebellion. Here's what Claire Farrell says.
I think a lot of people have recognised that what we've done has been quite important in terms of raising the bar and public awareness, and also the notion of it being a true crisis, a true emergency that has a ticking clock next to it. In terms of outcomes, it's woeful because we're not actually seeing a reduction in emissions, we're not actually seeing very ambitious policy, we're not actually seeing changes to regulation or to business and stuff. But I think it's unarguable at this point that radical action is necessary.
Continuing to approve new oil and gas fields makes the public more vulnerable to rising gas prices and more dependent on private companies like Shell, JP Morgan and others who are under no obligation to sell gas cheaply or at all. According to a new analysis by Carbon Brief, between 2022 and 2025, up to 46 such oil and gas projects could be approved in the UK, together producing 2.1 billion barrels of oil equivalent. Dr. Newman explains why companies like JP Morgan are harmful as they continue to be the biggest financier of fossil fuels in the world.
They're the world's biggest public financiers of fossil fuel expansion, which means the development of new projects that do not exist already. Many of these projects will take decades to come online. So we're talking, they're not going to produce anything now for the energy security issues. They're not going to help for that. They're going to come online in maybe the 2030s, maybe the 2040s, at which point our civilizations will hopefully have shifted as much as possible away from those those things. But they'll have all this infrastructure in place that they'll be saying, well, we've built it now. It's not cost efficient to leave this infrastructure and not use it. Let's use it and pump up more oil and more gas. So, and JP Morgan are well aware of what's going on. They've written internal papers about it that they denied were part of their corporate messaging. But these papers are out there. They've been written by JP Morgan workers who are very concerned about the way things are going. And lots of commentators, the International Energy Agency, and also a hell of a lot of the Royal Colleges, surgeons and physicians, the British Medical Association have all publicly commentated on how we do not need new oil and gas projects, and yet JP Morgan are a huge reason why there are new oil and gas projects.
On 19th July 2022, the UK recorded just over 40 degrees, its highest temperature in history, forcing the government to issue a national emergency. In response to the heatwave alert, Doctors for Extinction Rebellion campaigners carefully cracked 8 panes of glass at JP Morgan's offices in Canary Wharf in London. Dr. Newman explains the idea behind the protest.
And these 6 health professionals, a few hospital doctors, I think a couple of nurses, a couple of GPs, they all went there together. They did it on a Sunday when there were no workers in there. It also means there's less press around, which makes it more difficult to get any attention. But they didn't want to alarm people, so they went there on a quiet day. And they did it on the hottest day to try to help people connect the dots. Hottest day, fossil fuels, JP Morgan, or the financial sector as a whole. That was the intent. Again, it didn't get a huge amount of press. It got a little bit of a mention in the New York Times, but I think almost nothing in the UK. And that's the problem, right? What should we have done differently? Should we have aimed to get maximum press? Should we have aimed to go there on a Tuesday at midday and scared everyone? Well, if that's what you have to do to get press, then what's the trade-off?
Just Stop Oil took a more disruptive route all the way to the M25, forcing the police to close sections of the motorway. They used the occasion of the historic rise in temperatures to call for an immediate halt to new oil and gas projects in the UK. While this disruption caught eyeballs and got the mainstream media talking about Just Stop Oil and their agenda, it also angered many members of the public. Lawrence explains why Just Stop Oil banked on the heatwave to drive attention to the seriousness of climate change.
Those actions happened quite quickly, and it was in an immediate response to us breaking the temperature records of 40 degrees in this country. So it was an instantaneous response to something that we were all quite shocked and horrified by. There was initially a plan for that to be a longer lasting campaign where there would be continuous disruption, but a decision was made internally that wasn't the right move after those initial actions. So I think that's what we are trying to do differently with Just Stop Oil, is to create disruption for the oil industry and in cultural spaces that doesn't impact working people, and I think that action didn't quite line up with what we're trying to do with Just Stop Oil. I think the disruption caused to working people is not our aim, and I don't expect to see us employing those tactics again in the future.
This year, Just Stop Oil has been in the news for their rather unique campaigns where members of the group have tied themselves to goalposts at major football matches, stormed onto racetracks, and the most interesting one, glued themselves to renowned paintings across museums and galleries in the UK. Bad press is also some press, and these climate action groups welcome it. Here's what Claire says.
It's very difficult for people who are going to take these kinds of actions to understand or to be able to predict whether or not they're going to cut through. But getting into the media is important, not always detrimental to annoy people with this work. And of course, it's not good to just annoy people really a lot, and not have anything useful to say and not also have a bigger, more expansive, more useful conversation. But unfortunately, there is an element of disruption that has quite high function.
So did these tactics get the attention of the public? Yes. The public's interest? Very much so. Both Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil saw a huge spike in engagement, interest and sign-ups. Here's what Lawrence and Claire have to say.
So I work in social media for Just Stop Oil, and we've seen, at least statistically, 100% plus increases in engagement and reach and people coming to our pages. So really massive increases. Also, we've had some record sign-up for talks during the heatwave, and recently we did a talk called National Emergency with Chris Packham and Jeremy Corbyn and some other key speakers. And we had 3,000 people who came along to that talk, and we had, I think, 300 people sign up, take action with us, which is the largest sign-up in one go we've ever received.
I definitely think that a 40 degrees kind of, record-breaking day has probably made an enormous impact, because people are realising that it's here and now. So just in the last month, our sign-ups have doubled.
The makeup of these groups are gapingly young. They say young people are more clued into the reality that there are indeed climate solutions to this global problem. But they're also being patronized, and most adults think they don't know enough. For Just Stop Oil campaigns, young people who are rising up in action are getting arrested, sometimes without bail for weeks, if not months, and getting an offence on their permanent record. This is in itself a brave statement in support of their future. And Claire thinks they need all our love and support.
I think it's remarkable, and I think the young people who are involved in this work at this time deserve the utmost respect and love and support from every older person that understands the reality of the situation we're in.
Lauren says that radical action is the only option that young people have given the time frame they're working with.
Young people are very impassioned about this being one of our last shots at really creating the change we need in the timescale we're working with, and I think that is what pushes people to risking imprisonment. As a young person, they don't have the experience to get in policy position, work as an advisor for an organisation about how they can reduce the impact of climate change. In their timescale, all they can do is create the political will for action to happen and do this to create the social change for other people to come into a movement where they will start dealing with climate change issues.
A criticism often hurled at groups like Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion is that they are themselves not standing up in elections and then bringing about the change from themselves being in power. Of course, that's an ideal situation as far as these groups are concerned, but Ms. Farrell says it can be a lifetime's work.
The truth is that the political landscape in this country at the moment doesn't have a credible opposition that will tackle climate change, and so there isn't technically anybody to vote for. So unless we start a new party, build it and run it and develop it and then gain the traction and then win an election, which could be a lifetime's work, that's not going to work. Sexile was built with the idea that we have the social and political reality that is how it is. We have to work somehow with that to try and make the best of it, and of course we want to improve that as we go, but we also understand, we have the tools and the scenario that we have, and we need to work with that. So our suggestion has been to overhaul the political landscape with processes that include the population in making decisions, and with that comes the advocacy for participatory democracy, includes something which I think is more and more important now, which is anti-corruption. So it's not just inclusive. Like if we had an assembly of the type that we've been recommending, it would include a gender balance that reflects the nation, which is very different to Westminster, an educational and socio-economic balance that reflects the nation, which is very, very different to Westminster. It would include more people of colour, more disabled people, more marginalised people than you would ever see in a political space in this country. And those people then, because they aren't lobbied, because they don't have vested interest, because they aren't known, so they'd be in theory blackmailed as well, and they are able to look at the facts and at the information in front of them in the situation, and they're able to advocate for something which is in line with what's necessary rather than in line with what's deemed as politically possible.
These groups are also called by many other names in the media.
These Extinction Rebellion, Just Stop Oil and these groups remind me of end-time cultists that we've experienced in Britain throughout our history.
Here's what Lauren says the same response.
In relation to also being called radical extremists, one quote we've been using from Antonio Guterres, who's the current Secretary General of the United Nations, and his quote is, "Climate activists are often called dangerous radicals, but the true dangerous radicals are the fossil fuel industries continuing to grow fossil fuel extraction." And when the current Secretary General of the United Nations is standing with us and saying we are not extremists, that gives people enough faith that what they're doing is correct.
So what's next for these groups? Both Claire and Lawrence spill their beans.
At the moment, the conversations are about keeping the focus on democracy and citizen participation and understanding ourselves as having a people-powered theory of change, a collective theory of power, and advocating for a massive improvement in the average person's access to political decision-making.
Really seeing the power of the unions and people coming together. Our work with Just Stop Oil over the next few months is really to show solidarity and support them, because that's where revolutions have always come from. It's from working people. Our role with Just Stop Oil is to keep the narrative of climate change being very important and central in this, but not as more important than workers' rights and this cost of living crisis to be dealt with. So really over the next few months, bringing the climate crisis and the cost of living crisis together and uniting with there being a common enemy. October, we are coming together with a big coalition of people from the left and also from the environmental movement. We will be blockading Westminster for the whole of the month of October.
Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil are rallying for a lot more action along with a lot more conversation. The question is, will those in power respond, and how long will it take for them to respond with effective solutions that puts the planet over profits? There is perhaps hope in this new generation of young climate activists who are rising up and not backing down, taking to the streets with their unique campaigns, taking over social media to spread information, setting off a ripple effect of small actions that might just save the planet. If you liked this podcast, you can watch my YouTube series called Young in Nature, featuring young climate activists and their efforts towards climate education and climate justice around the world. This is Trishita Bose. Thank you for tuning in.